Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Thanks to Brian and to Dr. Andy Bertuso for organizing this event in the series of dialogic conversations. Yes, indeed, I do believe that every soliloquy and every monologue is a talking to yourself, and it is a dialogue in that respect. As the title says, I will be talking about a production of Hamlet at the prestigious Yugoslav Drama Theatre in Belgrade, directed by Aleksandar Popovski. First night was in September last year. I was responsible for the dramaturgy of the production and for the adaptation of the play. Allow me to say a few words about the creative process and how various decisions were made. This is the facade of the Yugoslav Drama Theatre with the big banner of the Main of William Shakespeare. Last year was the 400th anniversary of his death, and the theatre decided to celebrate together with many other theatres around the world, and they commissioned the fine young director Aleksandar Popovski to direct Hamlet. Aleksandar was originally my student at the Faculty of Dramatic Arts in Skopje, in my native country of Macedonia. He recently directed two of my plays, Odysseus and Figurae Veneris Historiae. On this latter one, I gave a research presentation a couple of years ago, which was videoed and is available on the website of the Center for Practice-Based Research. So, Aleksandar rang to say he was going to do Hamlet, and would I work with him? As what? I said. As a dramaturg, he said. A dramaturg to Shakespeare, mate. Well, he said, you used to teach me Shakespeare, remind me what you taught me. Since I'd forgotten what I taught him, I wanted to remind myself, so gloves were off. We started daily sessions on Skype, he was always somewhere, reading the play to each other scene by scene. I quickly slipped into my stress mode, feeling responsible and guilty both for our future production and for the past 400 years of tradition of this play. I had to dive into the matter. I brushed up on my Arden annotated edition of the text. I picked up an old copy of the standard edition of Hamlet in Serbo-Croat, and I checked again the Macedonian translation, which was done from Serbo-Croat and from Russian. After a few short days, I felt I'd already done enough to earn my modest fee, and that the following months would be working for free. Why, oh why, can't I make money in an easier and less profound way? I started watching all films and videos of theatre productions I could lay my hands on. Olivier, Burton, Smoktunovsky, Jacobi, Gibson, Branagh, Tennant, Cumberbatch. This last one I enjoyed especially, maybe because I watched it as an episode of Sherlock. No sooner had we started our initial work than a crisis erupted about our would-be Hamlet, an actor called Nebojša Glogovac. He is a huge star in that part of the world, and rumors spread in the Belgrade press that he was too old to be Hamlet. Glogovac was not happy about this, so he got angry with a few journalists, and this grew. Nebojša went to see the director and asked for some guarantees. What guarantees could we give him when we didn't know what we were doing? However, having to accommodate this practical problem had strong and lasting impact on the whole adaptation. Necessity is the mother of invention. The director and I went on exchanging ideas. He said he could see an opening scene at the graveyard. Lots of soldiers' coats scattered around. My intuition took note of this. What if we started from the end? The hard question to answer was, who is Hamlet today? What is he to us and what are we to him? In the olden times of modernism, the play of Hamlet was read as a tragic scream, a spasm of individual angst. Hamlet was a progressive rebel, a politically committed individual living in the world of pain, in a totalitarian conspiracy. But who is Hamlet now in this day and age of post-truth and collapse of humanist liberalism? How does he survive the weight of history, the daily spin of politics, the corruption and nationalism of Eastern Europe? What does his cry mean today to the masses who, instead of social commitment, choose consumerism? Denmark has become a global supermarket, a desert of the mind, a neoliberal prison with 24/7 online distractions. Hamlet has been blown to smithereens. The sky is empty like a burst balloon. I immersed myself into critical approaches to Hamlet. The mind boggles, Bradley, Cott, Lacan, revenge, delay, madness. Readings, religious, philosophical, feminist, psychoanalytical, gothic, heroic, meta-interpretational. And then one approach stood out and chimed with my intuition. It answered comprehensively the central duality of Hamlet. Friedrich Nietzsche, in The Birth of Tragedy, writes, "In this sense, the Dionysian man resembles Hamlet. Both have once looked truly into the essence of things. They have gained knowledge, and nausea inhibits action. For their action could not change anything in the eternal nature of things. They feel it to be ridiculous or humiliating that they should be asked to set right a world that is out of joint. Knowledge kills action. Action requires the veils of illusion." Hamlet is a Nietzschean hero, a huge thinker who has reached ultimate wisdom and insight. All he sees is quintessence of dust. He has seen through reality, is sickened by its repetition, out of his mind in the dark night of the soul. Hamlet may be incapable of meaningful action, but he is fully capable of meaningless activities. Play acting, mockery, practical jokes. As if he decided, well, since I'm doomed to these circles, at least I could have fun. I'll look for new variations and unexplored possibilities. He entertains his ego with fleeting impressions, and he bewilders everyone around him in the process. And so, in our production, scenes of bitter nihilism are interchanged with scenes of merry misanthropy. Hamlet comes out of the grave, he's just woken up, he opens his eyes, he brushes off the dust as someone who's come back from the dead. The previous day, he went through this drama, and now he's got to go through it again, in cold sweat and blood, in eternal recurrence. Shakespeare was under the influence of Montaigne. It is possible that in Hamlet he had in mind Montaigne's maxim, "To philosophize is to learn how to die." Hamlet is busy exercising the art of dying. In his soliloquy, "Readiness is all," he praises being ready for death, learning how to live on standby. At the end of our performance, he goes back to sleep in a grave, to be or not to be till dawn and the next waking up, provided he be able to sleep at all. Live, die, repeat. All this suddenly gave us the through line of action. We had the structural backbone. The material suddenly opened up like a video game with multiple choices of editing, loops, freeze frames, synchronicity, rewind, flash forward, and playback. Hamlet is the first modern Renaissance man who protests the narrative of how medieval princes should act. He behaves in a revolutionary, radically new way. He invents himself as an individual. To use the vocabulary of video game mechanics, Hamlet changes the rules of the game. He may be stuck in the groove of an embedded narrative, but he chooses to treat it as an emergent narrative. He is a player with agency, he interacts with the game world, he questions the designed levels and the rule structure. He varies the play from moment to moment, from session to session. When Polonius asks Hamlet, "What do you read, my lord?" Hamlet answers, "Words, words, words." For decades, I used to tease students. Tell me what your Hamlet is reading, I'll tell you how you're reading Hamlet. Is he reading the Bible, the Communist Manifesto, the sports pages in a newspaper, a porn magazine, a comic book? Which? Suddenly I was faced with this question myself, and I had to provide an answer for our production. I thought it would be exciting if Hamlet the character was reading Hamlet the play by William Shakespeare. So when our actor reads the line words, 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 he checks the edition, Reci Misau, Belgrade 1959. Then he compares his lines with the printed version, Act 2, Scene 2, and he shows the book to Polonius. So in this way, we obtained a case of autoreferentiality. The play is looking at itself in a mirror. Hamlet is repeatedly reading the script in which he is the main character. He is hovering over his life, endlessly trying to figure himself out, looking at himself from a bird's eye view, forever rummaging through the plot and the motivations. Alexander and I got swept away by our happy jazz improvisations, and we started taking various radical liberties. When you follow blind intuition, you throw caution to the wind. My wife Pat said, if this production was in England, they'd cut your head off. And I said, beware the Shakespeare police. In fact, I didn't say anything. It was only later I thought I could have said that. In hindsight, we were taking considerable risks and going out on a limb, although it didn't feel like that at all. We didn't do it lightly. It wasn't on a whim. We were focused on what we thought was the essence of the material. We wanted to go for the jugular, to discover the heart of the matter, to establish our reading of the play. We were fighting for the truth. Well, our truth. This was our Hamlet and our Shakespeare, and we were not interested in making compromises, showing mercy, or taking prisoners. So, the dominoes started to tumble. The gravedigger and Horatio merged into one character. Horatio the gravedigger is the old mentor and Hamlet's best friend, like the classical best friend characters of Sganarelle or Sancho Panza. In our production, the new king is cast as a much younger brother of the old king. So, Gertrude has married someone even younger than her son Hamlet. How hideous this must be for the Prince of Denmark. I cut the part of Laertes out of the production text wholesale. This produced important dramaturgical consequences. It dismantled the second plot, and it put a complete and obsessive accent on Hamlet. This means that Polonius is now giving to himself the wise advice which he in the play gives to his son Laertes. This also means that Ophelia now speaks to herself the advice which in the play she received from her brother Laertes. It is now Hamlet, he who witnesses Ophelia's madness, and not her brother. It is now to Hamlet that the queen describes the death of Ophelia, and not to Laertes. With this cut, the production also does away with the mechanics of the final duel between Hamlet and Laertes. If anything is dated in that play, it is this scene in Act 5. In the mousetrap scene, our actor speaks the same text which the ghost speaks to Hamlet at the beginning of the play. It is as if Hamlet had noted down what his father told him, and now he wants this verbatim scene reenacted in front of his uncle Claudius. The actor also speaks to Hamlet a deconstructed and radically reduced version of the to be or not to be soliloquy. He first stutters a list of the nouns from that speech, and then a list of the verbs from that speech, and these are the words, the Lego blocks, out of which Hamlet builds up his own monologue at the end. Now a few words about how we unpacked the tough nut of Hamlet's complex character and contradictory motivations. When I was a young boy, there was a hit song by the Rolling Stones called The 19th Nervous Breakdown. I wondered how one could have so many breakdowns. Well, Hamlet certainly did. He trembles like a reed, and he has daily thousand natural shocks that the flesh is heir to. Hamlet has bipolar, cyclical mood swings. Episodes of manic speed are interchanged with episodes of catatonic stupor. The deadly serious is replaced with the farcical, the sublime with the ridiculous. In this existential blockage and hesitancy, Hamlet is similar to the characters of Samuel Beckett. In Waiting for Godot, Estragon and Vladimir invent bizarre activities to cover up their lack of action and unbearable waiting. Winnie in Happy Days is not sure whether to kill herself or put on makeup in the morning as she is slowly sinking into a grave. Ham, mark the name, at the beginning of Endgame wakes up from a nightmare as if getting up from his grave, not knowing how to start the day, and his first line is, "Me to play." Well, this is how our Hamlet begins. Oh dear, do I really have to play again? And this, at one point I was sorry our actor wasn't even older, like crap. Perhaps then we could have tweaked the production towards the concept of Hamlet's last tape. We had an idea about Fortinbras, but alas, he ended up on the cutting floor. Very early on, we saw him as a new money tycoon, an oligarch ready to buy Elsinore and all of Denmark. Like this guy on the picture. He is not one of our actors, no. I found him on Google when I typed in thug aesthetics. He is very real and trades under the name of Bocco the Pumpkin. This was the synopsis of our entrance of Fortinbras. Everyone is dead, the stage is littered with corpses, there is a blip in the performance as if there was a misunderstanding. Suddenly, a working light is lit in the corner, a side door to the stage opens, enters privately a spiv boss, followed by bodyguards, geometers, assistants. The actors open up their eyes, they get up, the performance stops. Fortinbras looks at them as if to say, sorry, don't mind us, you go on acting, we just come to have a look. They check the stage as if they've come to take measurements. The actual situation of real estate in Belgrade is such that there are forces interested in buying the theatre building for redevelopment. As he walks out, Fortinbras says, take away these corpses. For some reason, this scene was always left under-rehearsed. Something was never quite right. In the end, hours before the first night, the director decided to leave him out of the show. The name of the actor had already been printed in the program. Some reviewers noticed this, some didn't. Oh well, that's how the dice rolled, and that's how the cookie crumbled. Now, about our choice of genre. No dramatic material has any fixed meaning. It is not something written in the stone of the plot, or characters, or dialogue. It is forever negotiable. The material receives meaning through the way it is handled. It is the sum result of the approach, the mode, the vision given by the author, or the actors, or the director, or the audience, and yes, the adapter. There are 5 fundamental dramatic modes or approaches, or as Robert Corrigan calls them, controlling visions. Tragedy, melodrama, comedy, farce, and tragic comedy. They represent different structures of perception, and of course they've been subject of endless theoretical debates over the centuries. The controlling vision of our production is tragic farce. It is a hybrid genre, it operates in the world of ambiguity, it mixes the serious and the comic, helplessness is seen from its funny side. Characters in tragic comedy just hang on in quiet desperation. They seem to be going through the motions of being alive. There is nothing they can do which is going to be meaningful or restorative or heroic. The tragicomic heroes are hardly heroes at all. They're not tragic rebels or protected lucky comic underdogs or innocent victims who are promised the resolution of melodrama. All they can do is cling to hope against hope. Paradoxically, this is similar to most people's experience of everyday life. We grin and bear it, we try to keep calm and carry on. I went to Belgrade for a week at the end of August 2016 to oversee some of the last rehearsals. It was a tense but happy process. The first night was on the 14th of September 2016. I didn't manage to be there for it as we were busy getting ready for the new academic year here at Christchurch. I heard from various sides that it was a huge success, and the reviews indeed were ecstatic. The main Belgrade daily Politica wrote, Shakespeare's Hamlet, probably the most performed play in the history of theatre, has, in the adaptation of GS, been deconstructed, pulled apart, and then reconstructed again as a postmodern tragic farce. The production begins with the advice to the actors from Act 3, which from the very start defines the production as a kind of a play within a play. The cogs of history turn inexorably. Kings are born and kings are murdered in an endless merry-go-round of repetitions. On the whole, it is a triumphantly successful production. Novosti in Belgrade Daily said, this is a Hamlet of this day and age, and a production that people will talk about for a long time to come. Hamlet is not a melancholy student, he is a mature man who knows how things really stand. There were at least 5 curtain calls and a standing ovation at the end of the play. Hamlet has been the talk of the town of Belgrade. The weekly Vreme wrote, the dramaturg and the director tumble scenes, lines and characters of the original Hamlet this way and that way. They pull apart Shakespeare to atoms, and then they pull him back together again. On one hand, he is resilient to it, and on the other hand, these two mostly know what they're doing. The weekly Danas wrote, what is going to happen to us all is the question which remains after the end of this performance. There is no Horatio in this Hamlet to bear witness to what once was, to tell us what happened. There is no collective memory as one of the instruments of change. All is only now. That which was is repeated again. There were numerous attempts to change reality, and yet justice has not been served. It slips through the fingers with ever-growing bitterness. So far, so good, you might say. But let us complicate things now a little bit. In January of this year, there was an article in The Observer which reminded me of my wife's ominous point about my head. The illustrious British playwright David Hare, in an interview with Geoffrey Sweet, said that British drama is being infected by radical European staging. Now we are heading in Britain towards an ever-aestheticized European theatre. We've got all those people called theatre makers, God help us, what a word, coming in and doing director's theatre, where you camp up classic plays and you cut them and you prune them around. And all the directorial stuff that we've managed to keep over on the continent is now coming over and beginning to infect our theatre. In the same article, luckily, there was also an opposite view. Rob Swain, a theatre director and professor of theatre practice at Birkbeck, University of London, disagrees with both Hare and Sweet, arguing that criticism of a European trend is far too simplistic and that there is never a definitive version of a play. So here we are, thrown back again into endless argument of negotiation of meaning. Yes, there are many people who don't want a word missing from a Shakespeare production, who believe that the text is sacred and that tinkering with it is sacrilege. But I could oversee a production of Hamlet in which everything is preserved to the T, the text, the characters, the plot, all there to the last letter, except that I've sped it up the tempo and Hamlet is played by Woody Allen or Rowan Atkinson. Suddenly Hamlet has been negotiated as a comedy. Aristotle could never write the theory of comedy because it stands in constant opposition to theory or order. It is anarchic and subversive. The smallest virus can mess up the system, turn milk into yogurt and wine into vinegar. We go to big wars for small differences. The round heads versus the pointed heads. Catholicism versus Orthodoxy. Shia versus Sunni. Different readings of the same text. How come that the same notes of Mozart's operas are one day turned into sublime and the next day into turgid recordings or productions? There is a mystery in how flour rises to become bread. And this is not included in the cooking recipe. Plays are recipes for performance. It takes talented directors and actors to turn these recipes into great dishes. And this plane of operation is beyond the grasp of amateurs. As a young man in the late 60s and early 70s of the last century, I had the luck to see various groundbreaking productions of world theatre at the Belgrade International Theatre Festival. Peter Brook, Richard Schechner, The Living Theatre, Jiří Grotowski, Peter Stein, Bob Wilson were all frequent visitors and household names in my then country of Yugoslavia. I have very vivid memories of one particular production of Othello directed by Peter Zadek at the Hamburg Schauspielhaus in 1977. It was a big scandal. Why? Because Othello looked like a savage, and Desdemona was fat and wore a kitschy 1950s bikini. Othello, the most romantic of Shakespeare's tragic characters, looked ludicrous. People complained he wasn't lofty enough, he didn't look normal, i.e. he didn't look like the cliché and the stereotype. In short, he didn't fit the parochial idea of good taste. I rather like that. I said to myself, hail to all art which shatters the terror of the status quo. Earlier on, I half-jokingly mentioned the Shakespeare police, but let me now, less than half-jokingly, mention the Samuel Beckett police. A few years ago in The Guardian, I read a scathing review of an Australian production of Beckett's Endgame. It started with a quotation by Beckett himself, who, in 1984, didn't like a production of his play at the American Repertory Theatre in Boston. So he wrote, "Any production of Endgame which ignores my stage directions is completely unacceptable to me. My play requires an empty room and 2 small windows. The American Repertory Theatre production, which dismisses my directions, is a complete parody of the play as conceived by me. Anybody who cares for the work couldn't fail to be disgusted by this." This was not an amateur production, oh no. The theatre is one of the best in the USA. And do you know who did the music for it? Philip Glass. The director's offense was to stage the then already 27-year-old play in a derelict subway tunnel. Court action resulted. Van Badham, who writes the review in The Guardian, says, since Beckett's death in 1989, his executors have been notoriously litigious in preserving the integrity of his work. The estate is denounced as Beckett's dead controlling hand and the enemy of art. A similar experience was endured by director Deborah Warner. She disobeyed the stage directions of Footfalls in 1994 and received a Beckett ban for life. Across the world, court summonses have appeared for casting women in male roles, and in 1998 a racially mixed cast of Waiting for Godot attracted legal threats amid accusations it had injected race into the play. At the end of his review, Badham writes, "The problem with trapping Beckett's work, essentially in reenactments of his productions of more than 50 years ago, is that the semiotics of visual and performed language has changed. The rhythms of speech, gesture, the relation of people to objects, parents to children, the very protocols of human engagement are always evolving, as are the means by which we use the effects of the stage to communicate. Society accumulates new images and signs. Nag and Nell may have been the most famous bin dwellers of the 1950s, but to children of my generation, says the critic, that image belongs to Oscar the Grouch. The reason why we engage directors in the theatre is to navigate the language of the play into new signs, to effect the understanding of the audience. Shakespeare has survived because successive generations of practitioners have had the freedom to manipulate performance and design to create a context that lends insight and meaning to language. And the last line of the review is, go to these shows to see the freshest work of the theatre year 1957. But if you want to see a Beckett work that lives, you're going to have to wait until they pass into the public domain in 2059. Enough of this, as this is really a matter for a separate investigation. Let's go back to David Hare's attack on European directors. In February of this year, 2 weeks after Hare's article, there was a reply in The Observer written by David Lunn, the artistic director of the Young Vic. Lunn says, European productions aren't infecting our theatre, they're telling hard truths. And this is how he ends his angry article. But in dark times, we need each other to do what we can from the center of our individual strength, skill, understanding, and experience. Theatre makers, playwrights, actors, directors, and the rest need to tell the hard, dark, contradictory truths as we see them, as generously and in as grown-up a manner as we can manage, offering sustenance each to each. By now, you probably wonder how all this relates to our production of Hamlet. Well, something happened that made me not fear for my head quite so much after all. A review of our show appeared in the London Stage. It was written by Natasha Kripny, the review's editor and joint lead critic. She saw the production in Belgrade. The title was, listen to this, Is Our Reverence for Shakespeare Holding Us Back? Allow me to share and savor this article with you. Near the beginning of Aleksandar Popovski's fascinating production of Hamlet for Belgrade's Jugoslovensko dramsko pozorište, we see Hamlet, played by an excellent Serbian actor Nebojša Glogovac, emerge from the grave. It's the beginning of a thrillingly meta-theatrical production that relocates the grave digger scene to the opening few minutes and goes on to have all manner of fun with the key speeches. Text is central to the production, but it is in no way sacrosanct. The main prop on Popovski's otherwise minimal stage is a vast white sheet, like a great sail, in which the characters sometimes become wrapped and tangled, and onto which words are frequently projected. So, when the ghost of Hamlet's father finally says his piece, it's delivered in a wonderful rush, the words flashing up. Backcloth. Other speeches get similar, if less frenetic treatment, and when Hamlet embarks on his "what a piece of work is man" speech, he does so in a parody of Shakespearean acting, all heightened emotion and sonorous line reading. Glogovac's Hamlet is fully aware of the weight of expectation that accompanies every line, the sense of anticipation. It's a production of circles and cycles with several nods to Beckett. The other main prop apart from that winding sheet is a Tristan. This is a Hamlet who is destined to repeat himself, line after line, life after life, night after night. This is also a production in which Claudius is portrayed as a preening kingling, performed by an actor about 20 years younger than Glogovac, who keeps stopping to snog Gertrude. So it's textually adventurous stuff that's also crucially playful and entertaining in the way it takes a machete to the play while still conveying its essence. I can't remember the last time I saw a production that was as much about the audience's relationship to the play as it was about Hamlet as one of the great roles. While I enjoyed Dream Think Speaks 2012 gaming of the play, the rest is silence, that production was problematic in other ways. This year, diversity in casting has been a key story in the staging of Shakespeare. Glenda Jackson's Lear, Emma Rice's divisive Dream at the Globe, and the Donmar Warehouse's all-female trilogy, but I do think there is a comparative timidity when it comes to tinkering with text in the UK. A wariness, a reticence that's probably in part justified given the critical response for those who don't respect Shakespeare's intentions, as if we really knew them, as if such things were fixed. I recall a certain amount of hoo-ha when it was revealed that the Benedict Cumberbatch Lindsay Turner Hamlet had used the most famous soliloquy as the production's opening lines. And the last slide, I know the language factor needs to be taken into account, and there is a degree of freedom and remove that comes from performing William Shakespeare to a Serbian audience instead of William Shakespeare in Stratford-upon-Avon. But my night of Belgrade Theatre was a reminder of how resilient and springy Shakespeare is. These plays can take it. They can be stretched and cat's cradled, they can be put through a mincer and set upon with a panel beater, and they'll still bounce back. The words intact, ready for another performance, another production, a press of the reset button. The production is now firmly in repertory in Belgrade. It was shown in Zagreb in the Baroque Playhouse of the Croatian National Theatre, where I went to see it in January. 2 weeks ago, it was performed in the even more Baroque Playhouse of the Volkstheater in Vienna, and it will be soon going to St. Petersburg and China. I can't tell you how I wish the production could make it to these here shores of Shakespeare's native land, even if it cost me my head. But perhaps Will Shakespeare would grant me his pardon. Thank you. I have a DVD of the whole production with English subtitles, but perhaps some other time.
Goran, just perhaps whilst some questions being thought up, that was just absolutely splendid, and it terrifyingly returns me to the text, which I think is maybe one of the things you've been wanting to do. And I don't know enough about the text to question on that, but I think I'm interested in it all over again. But what I would like to ask about is your use of the Dionysian, and by implication the Apollonian, which is its counterpart, isn't it? And I wondered if you took the notion that the Dionysian element could be seen as the interpretation, and the Apollonian element could be seen as the translation, i.e. attached to an essence and attached to the language of the words which just are. That what you're dealing with in some ways is the tension between Apollonian and Dionysian within the work and within the idea of theatre. And I wondered if, in that sense, could it be that, I'm just going to that's to respond to, but that there's a kind of pathology in either? That there's a kind of pathology about the Dionysian if it's taken to its full extent, which completely breaks from the text. And there's a pathology in the Apollonian if it sticks to the text.
The birth of tragedy brilliantly encapsulates the duality of Hamlet is absolutely seen through the essence of things. So once that anybody goes that deep, they go mad. They either kill themselves or they find ways of dealing with this, distracting oneself. This is why people become actors or become writers or become... That's the psychodrama which they need in order to forget the sublime and the nothingness of it all. This is Nietzsche's analysis of the play. And I thought to myself, this is so absolutely true. And I don't know whether it's true, but it chimes in how I I don't think that the Dionysian and Apollonian, well, I suppose that is what the balancing act of that whole book is. But when you said the pathological in both of those principles, did you say?
Yes.
I suppose that the extremes of those two principles would be certainly pathology, and that's why that yin yang and seesaw, I suppose, is very exciting. And it's very exciting to watch that on the stage, because it's absolutely as in the Beckett play. There are these fantastic stupors or catatonia in which this huge soliloquies. We didn't touch the soliloquies at all. You can't touch those. And in that respect, you can't play around. You can't have an amateurish. You need a superb actor to go to the soliloquies. It's a mountain to climb. It's Himalayas. You can play around in the valleys in between the soliloquies, but the soliloquies, you've got to be there for them. Mm. So that is the complexity of the approach.
Yeah. In the original version of Shakespeare of Hamlet, in the graveyard scene, it's when Laertes sort of leaps into the grave that Hamlet, as it were, draws into question his previous kind of verbose reflections on things, and at that point is able to sort of acknowledge his love for Ophelia. Mm. It's very interesting in your production that you've removed Laertes in that way, because that removes that element, doesn't it?
Oh God, it removes so many elements.
Yeah.
But Laertes is a sort of a boring Hamlet. It's a sub-little Hamlet. It's a homunculus. It's a homunculus to Hamlet. And that fourth act of Hamlet, in which Hamlet doesn't appear, he's supposed to have pissed off to England. It's unbearably long. And to have missed the points of, excuse me, Shakespeare, wherever you are, but I mean, if a man has made a woman mad, don't you think that as a dramatic character he should be looking at her while she's being mad? If he's taken her to her grave, don't you think he should be there when the queen tells him about how she drowned herself, rather than talk about all of these things to her brother who was away in Paris? So certainly huge liberties, but we did want half the play anyway. We did want it the truncated version, so we could really turn it around and get this. We were more interested in the cycle rather than in the. Mind you, if you do a proper Shakespearean version of the material, it will be 7 hours long, which is how long the last production in Berlin took. And I'd love to work with someone else on a different production. I would love to work with someone else on a 12 hours long Hamlet. But I mean, I worked with a very particular guy who has very particular approach to theatre. I knew this, and I tried to accommodate him. I tried to accommodate the theatre. We have a 2-hour performance without a break. So in that respect, I really like to gauge who commissions me and what they want for the money. And I could very easily reshuffle things, quite happily reshuffle things. Because again, I really believe in the playability, in negotiation of meaning. That's, Hey, Paul.
Goran, excellent for taking liberties with Shakespeare. As a playwright yourself, have there not been productions where you've thought, come on now, Mr. Director, that's not what I'm saying?
Oh,
are there limitations?
Absolutely. Most of the time you get very frustrated. They're not reading what you're doing. Yeah.
And how do you react to that?
Well, this same director messed around with most of the stuff that he directed of mine. But because he's got chutzpah, whatever the word for it, he really achieves amazing results. Completely crazy results. He puts people against, he challenges them. For example, to give you an example, we're rehearsing the scene in which the queen and the king have to climb up to the there is a throne in the back of the stage. He has a ramp which is 2.5 meters it's impossible to get up on it. So they have to help each other, and he ties their hands behind their back and asks them to play basketball. And great actors never try to think too much. They just think through the doing, and when that happens, it's magical. If an actor starts saying, but why do you think that? Go away. Go into directing or writing. Don't ask that. You've got to be an empty vessel. You know? And of course, it can lead to hell with best of intentions. So we were very lucky that it didn't. It's always on a knife's edge. So.
Do you think there's something almost sort of strangely ironic about people getting concerned about messing around with Hamlet? Because, I mean, originally there were various versions of it anyway, weren't there? Which were
Look,
some of the differences were quite
Thomas Kidd.
And the whole play itself is about...
Thomas Kidd wrote a play called Hamlet, which we don't have a copy of. William Shakespeare took it and made it his. You think to yourself, wait a minute, what about authorship? William Shakespeare stole 36 plots of the 37 plays he wrote. He was so busy, he didn't... The originality, what are we talking about? It's like Tarantino, you know? Take a B-movie film from Hong Kong, remake it, it's yours. Bertolt Brecht, the greatest player of the 20th century, never bothered to invent one new plot. Just take it. This is what I keep telling my students. You know? What do you want? All you need to do is breathe. You take in air. You don't think about where is air, what am I going to breathe today? It's everywhere. So to learn how to be easy with that, I mean, the first thing you can do, open up a file in your computer, Hamlet, and put your name over it. And then, of course, you will break your back trying to figure out what you want to do with it. But one should be crazy and fearless in certain situations. Mind you, it's not easy when you appear in front of actors. Actors want to be good on the stage, they want a successful production, and there are 20 of them looking at you. You're trying to tell them what the show is going to be. Not easy. Sometimes they look at you as a lunatic. Yeah, but we've got to do this. You know, it's so easy for you to say, yeah. So, yeah. They call it a creative act.
Hamlet obviously isn't just psychological, it's political. And part of his difficulties are dealing with a truth that dare not speak its name. And he uses or tries to use the players to do that. How did you keep the play within the play intact? Did you get rid of it? Did you chop it around?
Well, I mentioned that the play within the play is the ghost's discussion with Hamlet. It's such a simple thing to do, such an obvious thing to do. If I want to scandalize the uncle who killed my father, the simplest thing I can do, rather than talk about bloody Hecuba, I'm going to put in the play my discussion with my dead father, which happened last night. It works like crazy on the stage. But talking about the politics, it's a tired. The politics of the material has a very ironic and very tired slant to it, politically speaking. I've been through a few revolutions in my life. I was a kid in 1968 when we wanted to change the world. Then we wanted to change it in 1989 when Yugoslavia fell apart. Then in 1991 when Milosevic came to power. So it's the cycles of 10 years of being a Hamlet. And at the age of 60, you've been through a few Hamlets. You think, I can't be bothered again. And I found that very exciting too. And this is one of the reviewers, an old friend of mine, is writing exactly that. What's going to happen to us all? We've been through this situation before. I mean, she's a fearless civil rights lady. Borka Pavicevic is her name. She works in the Soros. She's got a center for cultural decontamination, it's called. For 30 years, she's been trying to make changes to the Serbian mindset. You know? And if she approved of the material, then that's okay. But it's not a young man's Hamlet. It is not this is for the first time I'm going to kill this guy and I'm going to make, I died in 1977 when punk came on the stage. No, I first died in 1970. After Cream and Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles and the Stones, suddenly Bay City Rollers come. And there is a song in the charts called Chirpy Chirpy Chip Chip. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, what's going on? I'm 18, I want to go forward now. This is forever going to go forward. No, there is progress, but there is regress as well. So when Eddie McMillan's punks came, I thought to myself, what am I going to do with myself? Dead at 27 twice. So I suppose when you go into Eddie McMillan's office, there is an encyclopedia of punk, 50th anniversary or whatever, dead in the covers. So anyway.
So what do you think you learned about your own writing in doing what you did with Hamlet? Because clearly that was another kind of task. Have you taken anything of that fearlessness? I'm sure you're fearless anyway with your own work, but has it fed into original material that you're going to write yourself?
Well, some nasty people said, why don't you write your own play based on the matter? But I suppose give me another couple of years, I'll write my new play and I'll tell you what I've learned. Because at the moment I'm in negotiations with a guy in Italy, in Lecce. I'm writing a new play, and in a few months' time I might come back here and talk about that and connect it to the lessons learned.
Well, did you add any text of your own?
No.
Would that have been okay if you decided you would?
No, I don't think I didn't want to go there.
There's an interesting tension between the reverence demonstrated by taking stuff out and removing scenes and so on. At the same time, there's a commitment to not do things like, you can't cut up a soliloquy or you can't add other words. So there's still some sort of edifice, which is the play. But why, if once you've decided to cut a few lines, why not cut a few more and add some of your own?
Well, we were pretty fearless with cutting. Cutting is okay in theatre. Nobody minds that. But adding text, no. I mean, that would be absolutely. That is not something that I ever thought I would do. I mean, I suppose I added that line of the guy looking at the book that he is reading words from, and saying what the addition of that. So that is a cheeky addition of lines. But no. But it's such a. I mean, it's such a Himalayan material. It's
Yeah, I've got a student who's got a long-term project. He's sort of doing to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead what that play does to Hamlet. Did you have any sort of influence, whether it's something from Stoppard or just Blackadder or whatever? There seems to be, obviously I haven't seen it, a real playfulness in this version of Hamlet. Were you influenced by prior sort of popular cultural mictates of Hamlet or versions?
But I mean, there were some very simple, when you push dominoes, all you need to do is just that, and then all things tumble. I mean, when a director says, what are we going to do with the duel? I don't like, what's the duel going to look like? I don't want fencing out of the way, or are they going to have, let's get it out. This is how they work. So you've got to chase them and say, wait a minute, you can't do this. Yeah? I made a mistake, for example. I told my director on Skype one day, I said, listen to this, you. And I gave him Hollow Men, the T.S. Eliot poem. I said, I'm going to give you something, but you're not going to put that in the show. And he did. Because the gravedigger is singing a song, and he's singing about we are You know, don't play around with. They're dangerous people. It's a dangerous, and you're trying to navigate a boat full of lunatics, you know, and be responsible for the anchor of things. It's not an easy thing to do. Not an easy thing to do at all. Right. Well, I think we're out of time. Very close afternoon.
Thank you, Goran.
I would like to thank you for being here today. Thank you very much. And,
Thank you, Goran.
cheers.
Wonderful.
Thank you.